Thank you all for coming. This is so exciting. When I started with the consortium 12 years ago, we were so happy if we had 4 or 5 homeschoolers. And now look around. How many of you have been homeschooling at least one full year? How many are just thinking about homeschooling? A few. And how many have been homeschooling more than 5 years? 10 years? 20 years? I knew there was at least one. All right, well, look around. Connect with each other during this conference. This is your community. I love this conference because we are around university professors, education district executives. We are with classical school teachers, headmasters, and homeschoolers. Sometimes it's uniquely a homeschool conference where I'm speaking, but the mix is really wonderful for all of us. But this is your community, so note the faces. This is a great time to meet each other and connect during meals, breaks, etc. This is Classical Education and the Homeschool Part 1. This one will be more of a traditional presentation with some time for questions at the end. Part 2 is completely different. We're going to tackle different topics, but in a more town hall discussion type of a format. So someone asked me already, is Part 2 just a repeat of Part 1? No, it's not. We wanted to give our homeschoolers enough time to connect and think about the topics that matter to them, that we have 2 separate sessions to do so. Have you ever wondered whether a homeschool can be as strong and as effective as the best classical school you've ever heard of or dreamed about? Can a homeschool be classical? Can a homeschool hold to high academic standards? And what about friends? Can homeschooled children make good, edifying, lasting friendships? Can a homeschool help to lead a child to that which is lasting, as we heard in our plenary session just a little bit ago? Can a homeschool offer a remarkable education? We see partial answers today from colleges and universities eager to enroll homeschooled students. Even so, it is easy to doubt ourselves when we are contemplating homeschooling or in the midst of homeschooling. The laundry beckons, as does the cooking, the cleaning, our part-time or full-time work. Our parents need us, our congregation needs us, our neighbors need us. It may be impossible for us to devote the 6 to 8 hours daily to our children's education, as classical schools seem to accomplish effortlessly. On the other hand, might the homeschool offer some advantages to offset those provided by a classical school? Either way, sometimes we may feel as if we're all on our own. More than any other question when contemplating classical education and the homeschool, I asked myself this question: am I equal to this task? When my children were just 3, I asked this question: would classical education in my home school be best for these little children? As many of you know, these children came to us through adoption. Both had special needs from the beginning. My daughter qualified for the public school special education early childhood program at age 3. Should I send her? And I would soon learn that the only classical school in the St. Louis area where we lived would say, we cannot take them due to their special needs. I needed to make a decision. I did not know if I could homeschool but for their sakes, I decided to try. Looking back now, I find it amusing that there I was with a master's degree in education, wondering if I could teach my own 2 children. I believe that was influenced in no small part to some theories from my state teacher training program, which was strong in many ways, but was neither classical nor Christian in its orientation. That full story is told in Simply Classical, A Beautiful Education for Any Child. Simply Classical. I decided to homeschool, but I told myself that if ever I found a better option for them, or became persuaded that an existing classical school would give them a stronger education than I could provide, I would send them. Until then, I would try to make my homeschool the best possible place for my children. Now, nearly 25 years later, I have communicated with thousands of homeschooling mothers and fathers through my work with this consortium and with Memoria Press. I have seen the fruit of classical education in the homeschool. I have seen this fruit in my own children, and I've seen the fruit in the grown children who were classically educated at home in other homeschooling families. Most intimately, I've observed one family who classically homeschooled near us the entire time. Together, we visited the art museum, a sculpture park, nature preserves, a root beer bottling company, and a science center. Also, we all spent many hours playing together at local parks and going to the library. All 5 of the children in their homeschool, like ours, studied Latin, learned to play the piano, devoured literature, and studied math as high as they could go. The average ACT score in their classical homeschooling family was 30. This, of course, was not an end in itself, but this later allowed them to pursue post-homeschool education in areas they enjoyed. The oldest in that family just earned his master's degree in library science, a natural fit for him. He easily doubled in English and music as an undergrad student. His younger brother entered a trade school, and his mother marveled, on his first job, made more money than she, who had been teaching 26 years in a parochial school while homeschooling them. As a side note, she homeschooled nights and summers, while Dad worked nights and oversaw homework, even loosely as he tried to sleep, during the day. And yet, they accomplished this. More importantly, all of the adult children in that faithful family still attend church today. Most recently, one of the daughters, now an art major, illustrated the cover of my daughter Michelle's 3rd and most recent poetry book. Another classically homeschooled teen from our little library Latin class that I taught illustrated Michelle's first poetry book. My son Michael enjoyed drawing at a homeschool co-op, so he illustrated the inside pages of Michelle's poetry books. Her poems, original poems by the way, are brimming with impressions rooted in the Christian faith. If you don't know about these, look up Michelle's Swope sometime at Amazon. Our experience, like that of our friends, is not unique. Classical education can occur in the homeschool. Many of you here today can already attest to this. You could tell your own stories, and I hope you share these with each other at lunchtime, on breaks. Share them with me. We're going to hear one such story from one of our attendees here later in the session. Note, none of this is to take away from the remarkable education given by our classical schools, our classical Lutheran schools. When a classical education is given in the rich context of the historic Christian faith, this is a beautiful gift, whether in the church, the school, the home, or some combination of these. Indeed, the collaboration among the church, the school, and the home is one of the most impressive and gratifying changes I have witnessed over the past decade or so in the classical education movement. Where once I was puzzled by an us versus them mentality, an adversarial view of the home school and the school, today I believe the classical Lutheran education movement is leading the way to see creative configurations abounding. From the micro school to online classical classes offered through a classical Lutheran school to homeschoolers, to brick and mortar classical Lutheran schools offering a la carte options to homeschoolers. We are working together now at last. One of the most interesting examples of partnership is seen in the cottage school. How many of you know about the cottage school kind of movement? This can become a best of both worlds scenario to provide accountability to homeschooling parents and friendships for homeschooled children and strong, steady academic achievement. Some cottage schools offer 1 day per week, some 2 days per week, some 3, with the remaining days for homeschooling. With the right group of families, this can be a wonderful configuration. Several of our own homeschoolers from this very conference over the years have started such schools or co-ops, often meeting in a church with matins led by the pastor. This partnership has been a joy to see. The most important thing I've learned over the years is that when you homeschool, especially in the big homeschooling world, you're narrowing to classical. Within that, you're narrowing to Lutheran. You may very well feel alone, but in fact, you are never alone. Remember my question, am I equal to this task? The honest truth was no. But I did not need to be. The Lord was with me. In at least 3 ways, you have far more support for classical education in the homeschool, even classical Lutheran education in the homeschool, than you may have ever dreamed possible. In the first way, resources. You will learn, I hope, of some resources you did not even know existed while you were here at this conference. Start by visiting the vendors at this conference. Open their books, tell them what you were looking for. If you have not yet heard, the LCMS also commissioned a book just to support Lutheran homeschoolers. This idea came from Mr. Bill Cochran and Mr. Terry Schmidt, the successive directors of LCMS School Ministry. Yes, LCMS School Ministry commissioned a book for Lutheran homeschoolers. It is called Eternal Treasures, Teaching Your Child at Home. How many of you have already read this book? A handful. Eternal Treasures, Teaching Your Child at Home. The only thing is that they said, we do not want to be a vendor. We don't want to be a bookstore. We are LCMS School Ministry. We don't want boxes in our office. So what they requested is that it only be available through Amazon, just because then we could have print on demand. That's where you can find it. It's the only place you can find it. Eternal Treasures, Teaching Your Child at Home. I think I was the only Lutheran homeschooler they knew, and possibly certainly the only one they knew who likes to write, because they commissioned me to put this together, but I didn't want it to just be my voice. So what I did is I paired with another homeschooler, younger than I, who taught also with a view to taking faith instruction seriously and academic instruction seriously. It seems like all would, but there are different movements within homeschooling, just as in school education. Those were my criteria. So then I also gathered voices from the confessional Lutheran community. Some of you are in this book, to give reasons, resources, and ideas for teaching academics, teaching the faith, and living with an intentional presence of the church year in the home. As one homeschooler wrote, she is a frequent attendee of CCLE conferences, she said, "In this book, you will meet friends you did not know you had." Another resource for teaching hymnody, Gloria, Kloria, raise your hand if you've heard of them. It is a newer, small publisher that will become your small child's best friend to learning hymns by heart. From board books to picture books and beyond, Gloria is giving an illustrated voice to confessional hymns for children. You can find them here at this conference at the Wittenberg Academy booth. So the Wittenberg Academy carries the Gloria hymn books. Another resource is LutheranHomeschool.com. LutheranHomeschool.com, led by Deaconess Mary Murby. How many of you already know about that one? Quite a few. She's done a good job promoting that. It's a vast collection of resources. Caveat, not all are classical in pedagogy or confessional in theology, but all are written by Lutherans. Her top recommendations will make their way into our next edition of this book, the CCLE Curriculum Resource Guide. How many of you know about this one? Okay, good, quite a few. This first came out 7 years ago. This is, we hope, the one-stop shopping guide from infancy to advanced studies in everything from doctrine, numbers and math, learning letters and literature, Latin and Greek, geography and history, science, penmanship, grammar, logic, apologetics, and more. We plan to update this within the next school year, but if you need a guide for this fall, this book will be a welcome companion for you, even in its current state. And you can find this at ccle.org or Amazon. If you're shopping for the other ones on Amazon, this is there also. Bundle them all together. So the history of this book, is that Melinda Heine, who's here at this conference, she and I were having a conversation late in our homeschooling lives. In fact, she had already graduated her children. We were in her living room, and one of us said, "Don't you wish, with all the homeschooling catalogs, that you would have had somebody vet all of those resources from both a classical and Lutheran understanding before you started homeschooling?" And so then we paused, we're sipping on our tea, and we said, we should make a list for people. So we started making a list, Then we realized to be comprehensive, we needed to cover resources for every subject. Then we decided to be really useful, we needed to cover resources for every age in every subject. And then we needed help organizing the resources in a classical manner. Dr. Veith generously stepped in to help us with the organizing. Thus, more than a list, this became an entire book. And again, it's called the Curriculum Resource Guide for Classical Lutheran Education. And you can find it at CCLE.org or on Amazon. And I received no royalties from this. This really was just a labor of love, and also none on this either. It was just really my desire, as seemingly the only classical Lutheran homeschooler tapped for such things, to get resources into the hands of people. So, resources. You are never alone. You have plenty of resources. If you haven't seen CCLE's new website, CCLE.org, you can find free online reading, free back issues of our academic journal, free video recordings, and other resources for you. And again, take time to visit the vendors for this conference, then you can see, hold, and preview the many teaching materials for yourself. You also have C. What do you think C is? You're never alone because you have, what is Christ? Would have been very good to put there. Any other ideas? Community, yes. It may not seem like you have community, but you do. As I said, look around right here. My very first CCLE conference was 2009, and I said, this just must be what heaven is like. I had been to education conferences, of course. I had been to homeschooling conferences, but never in my life had I seen classical and Lutheran come together in sessions and worship. It was so glorious, and it still is. If you do not have a local, free, low-cost community of classical, faith-centered homeschool families, start one. In our community, nothing like this existed when my children were little, and because of my children's special learning needs, I wanted to separate socializing from academics. But I wanted community. We were a little weak on physical education, because I am myself, but I do love swimming, so I asked our community center if we could start a homeschool swim. All we needed was a lifeguard and 1 hour in that pool at our community center twice a week. Thus, Homeschool Swim was born. They said yes. It still exists today. Yeah. For over a decade, twice a week, we swam with the family of 5 children I mentioned before. Everyone in both families was studying Latin. Everyone in both families was reading good literature. Everyone in both families was taking academics and faith instruction seriously. We did not always talk about this. While the children were racing with their different swimming strokes I was teaching them, or when they were playing on the water slide or having back floating contests, we didn't need to. We shared this unspoken community. When it came up, of course we're learning Latin. Our children learned the same songs on the piano. They attended our church's summer Bible school. All of this helped sustain my efforts when other families around us, by contrast, chose a more relaxed or non-academic approach to homeschooling. Best of all, our 2 families are still very close. My son was the honorary best man at their oldest son's wedding. My daughter loves the theater, but she cannot sustain the traditional rehearsals They're just too grueling for her stamina. So the family, who has its own theater guild in our little town, kindly sets up a recording studio for Michelle to record her voice and then superimpose those recordings into the scenes of the many exceptional plays that their theater guild produces. I had no theater background, but as it turned out, I was not alone. In the other family, both parents were theater majors. All of the children are very strong in dramatics. The parents actually met in a play in college. So Michelle, through community, has the theater experience she loves. Ideally, such a community would start within your own congregation. But if this is not yet possible, you might create a classical homeschooling community in your own way. Also, our CCLE Facebook group is called the Classical Lutheran Homeschoolers. Actually, not the, but it's just Classical Lutheran Homeschoolers. And Wittenberg Academy plays an exceptionally strong role in bringing community for confessional Lutheran homeschool families. Community. You're never alone because of abundant teaching resources available for classical Lutheran education, the possibility of community, and because of God Himself. In Simply Classical, the book, I share that one of the most comforting and influential books for my homeschooling life was not a standard book on homeschooling, but rather a book by Dr. Veith. The title is God at Work, Your Christian Vocation in All of Life. God at Work, Your Christian Vocation in All of Life. If you look this up, I'm sure the cover looks different. This is my copy from 20 plus years ago, and I'm sure he has revised it. But as I read God at Work for the first time, I began to understand and feel the relief of this. I never needed to waste time worrying. I just needed to get busy teaching. I never needed to waste time worrying. I just needed to get busy teaching. It was always the Lord Himself who was at work through me for the eternal sake of my children. This was an immeasurable comfort because often homeschooling only magnified my weaknesses. Again and again, I could be reassured that my Heavenly Father is also my children's Heavenly Father. Dr. Veith writes this: the magnitude of the parent's role, the remarkable power fathers and mothers have to create, nurture, and shape their children, both physically and spiritually, has to do with the fact that God is the true parent. Throughout the Bible, both in the Old Testament and the New, God reveals Himself as our Father. Jesus particularly taught us to pray to our Father who art in heaven. He is the source of our lives. He is our provider, our protector, our authority. Dr. Veith notes that God chooses to exercise His fatherhood through the earthen vessel of ordinary, distracted, mistake-prone human beings is another of His miracles. From Augustine's Confessions, Dr. Veith shares that Augustine himself pondered the miraculous care from God for Augustine through his own parents. Specifically, Augustine writes of when he was nursed as a baby, reading from Book 1, Chapter 6 of Augustine's Confessions, Augustine prays, "But the consolations of your mercies upheld me, as I have heard from the parents of my flesh, him from whom and her in whom you formed me in time, for I do not remember. Through my mother you gave me infant food, in accordance with your ordinance and the riches which are distributed deep in the natural order. Augustine speaks of his mother and his nurse in this manner: for the good which came to me from them was a good for them. Yet it was not from them, but through them. Indeed, all good things come from you, O God, and from my God is all my salvation. Thus saith Augustine. To be certain, we sin in our family vocations. Children sin against parents and each other. Parents sin against children and each other. Lord, have mercy. But in his mercy we are forgiven. He hath made us accepted in the Beloved, in whom we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins according to the riches of his grace. Thanks be to God. Because of God's work through us, as Dr. Veith concludes in the chapter, parents become blessings to their children. Children are blessings to their parents. Even though the treasures of God's gifts are hidden in earthen vessels, he continues to pour out his love through human beings, whom he has placed in families. In this way, because of the work, care, and loving provision of God himself, we are never alone. 25 years ago, I thought about homeschooling my little children. But I needed resources, I needed community, and I needed to know that God was at work through me for the good of my children. I never found a place that seemed better suited for my children, so we continued homeschooling through their high school graduation. Michael was our valedictorian, and Michelle, our salutatorian. My daughter loved our homeschool swim, playing in our play group, and with neighborhood children, dancing with other girls in a ballet class, being with cousins, being with a family that I talked about. But she had one closest friend throughout her homeschooling. Wish I had a bigger picture of this. Her one closest friend throughout homeschooling was her twin brother. To this day, they are each other's closest companions. When taking graduation pictures, she insisted that there be one that had both of them in it. Today, as I mentioned, Michelle writes poetry. She enjoys attending conferences with me. She loves speaking or sharing her poetry with classical school educators, homeschoolers across the country. But at home, her life is very ordinary. She helps with the laundry. She empties the dishwasher. She reads many books. She takes long walks with her brother. She sings hymns in church on Sunday mornings. By day, Michelle works at a coffee shop that hires people with special needs. Her role is working the floor. She loves chatting with the customers, clearing the tables, and asking, is there anything else you need? Our town is small, so she often knows her customers. Hers is a life of service and cheer. I do not know if this would have been the outcome for her in any other educational setting. Michael continues to be an avid reader. Not long ago, he spent $15 on a good investment to assist this habit, a hammock he found at Aldi. Each year he asks for his Christmas money, however, to fund mission work through a faithful group translating confessional works into numerous languages. Today, Michael's love of reading, his love of playing or singing hymns at the piano, and his God-given desire for evangelism are sufficient evidence for me that yes, with the help of God, a classical Christian education can indeed be accomplished at home. Michael has faced a host of medical challenges in his young life, not the least of which are schizophrenia and Parkinsonism. But he has often wanted to travel with me. Finally, healthy enough to join me for the first time, this is his first classical education conference. He wanted to see Concordia Theological Seminary that he has seen on calendars at our church. He also wants to see its library especially, so we will slip off at some point to do this. And he is here with us today. Stand up. All of this is a miracle to me. It is a gift from God. When you embark on this endeavor and as you continue, no matter how many years, you will never be alone. No matter what other families choose, no matter the frailties of ourselves or our children, and no matter what happens in this world all around us, go baptizing and teaching, Jesus commands us. He assures us, and lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the world. In your classical homeschool, as in life, may you always know that the Lord is with you, for we are never alone. Thanks be to God. We have a moment for a story from Redeemer Classical School. Rachel has 3 minutes to tell a story. Veteran homeschooler.
I taught at Zion Lutheran Academy here in Fort Wayne when President Harrison was the senior pastor, and I attended the first 3 or 4 CCLE. I spoke at least 2 of them, but the last time I attended CCLE was 20 years ago, and I got married, and when I got pregnant, we decided right away we wanted to homeschool, and we homeschooled 3 boys through 8th grade. The oldest one pretty much taught himself to read and was the stereotypical homeschooler. And the second one, he turned 7, turned 8, turned 9, turned 10, could not read, and later found out that he had some vision difficulties. And we just kept doing a lot of the things that I had done in my teaching at classical school, but read aloud to him instead of him reading it. And it's kind of a blur. We read so much good literature. I don't even remember everything that we read, but he eventually learned how to read, and we homeschooled all of our boys through 8th grade, and then they go to Concordia High School here in town. And the oldest one just graduated from high school with 4 years of Latin and Greek, and was Latin Student of the Year, and I really attribute that to his homeschool Latin. But the younger one has an IEP, and we thought, just go to school and do the best you can do. We don't expect all A's out of you. And he was bored in English 9 because we had read everything in homeschool. And I talked to the teacher at parent-teacher conferences. Well, of course, we're going to be doing the Odyssey, and we're going to be doing Romeo and Juliet, and this is all going to be harder. This is just the beginning of the year. It's going to get harder. Well, it never got harder, so he asked if he could do Honors English 10. And I'm like, you did well in regular English, but what's on the list? What are they going to read? And do you realize you have summer homework? And I can do it. I really can. And so now he actually had to start reading things because we had not done all of this in homeschool. And his summer homework was to read 1984, and he met all the deadlines and no problem writing assignments that I would have had a difficult time with. And went through the whole year, A's, and he's starting his junior year next year. But if you would have told me back, you know, this boy that couldn't even read would be going to high school, but you know, we read that in homeschool, and I don't even remember reading some of that. I'm sure that my husband read some of it in the evenings. But we were the weird homeschoolers that were not following some curriculum like the other people in our area. We were just taking good literature, what Memoria Press recommended, and also it's amazing in the last 20 years what resources have come out.
Yes, and we're going to have to wrap that up. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. We have about 2 minutes. There are evaluations in your folder. I'm supposed to tell you to take these 2 or 3 minutes to fill them out, I think. Is that correct? See if they're there. If no, okay, then you have no homework. All right, that is very good. All right, thank you very much for coming.